Hey everybody, it's Jason, and this is Clockwork Studios and Ether RPG. And today we're going to actually talk about making use of that lovely character sheet that we built of Seraph the Thief in our last video. Yes, you might notice the page here itself is a bit crinkled. Well, that's unfortunately because the video I originally took for this didn't quite take. So we're reshooting it. I'm sure you can imagine what happened to the piece of paper. Anyway, let's get right to it. So last time we actually talked about how to build all these numbers. This time we're actually going to talk about how to use them. So, the first thing that you need to know about Ether RPG is the die 20 is the key roll for almost every single skill in the entire game. And the skills are pretty much the rolls that you use for almost every roll in the game. So you don't need to look anywhere else on the sheet for the most part, except for right here. Combat, lore, and utility. Now, there are two types of roles in Ether RPG. There's opposed and there's unopposed. An opposed roll is when one character rolls against another character and they compare the results of their rolls. An unopposed roll is when one character rolls against a set value. Yes, I understand that's technically still opposed, but that's the language that we're using. So, let's just say, for example here, that Seraph is making an unopposed roll. Let's say that it's customs. Seraph has a 16. Let's say the difficulty is 25. Well, all that means is I need to roll at least a 10, because you have to roll greater than your target value. So in this case, would you look at that? Seraph happened to roll a 9. This is a good time to bring that up. So what happens if you tie? Well, you re-roll. Seraph, in this case, only rolled a 4, so that would only be a total of 20. Seraph obviously failed. Easy enough. So, an opposed roll. Well, an opposed roll is pretty simple. So let's say that Seraph is having to roll stealth against, let's just do the standard search, of course. Well, let's just use Seraph's numbers here. So, stealth of 21 and a search of 16. So the opponent has Seraph's search, a 16. So Seraph will roll first. Look at that. Seraph happened to roll a 15, plus her 21 is a 36. That means the opponent needs to roll a 20. So, the opponent did not roll a 20, as you can see. So the opponent failed and could not notice Seraph through stealth. So you might be asking, how does a die 20 work? Are there criticals or are there numbers like that? There are a lot of other systems. Well, sure are. A 1 is always a failure, no matter what. And a 20 is always a success, no matter what. So, but those are called critical successes and critical failures. They aren't a critical hit. So now you might be asking, well, Jason, I remember when we built the sheet last time, you were talking about a critical hit and a critical defense. How do those apply? Well, it's very simple. Whenever you're making attack actions, so a combat offensive roll, you actually roll a percentile dice. As you can see, the die 10s here has 2 digits, meaning the 10s, and this one has 1 digit, meaning the 1s, with every attack you roll. So in Seraph's case, you might notice that Seraph has an 18 for her critical hit value. Also has an 18 for her critical defense. Well, that means that Seraph knocks down 18% of all attacks coming at her and adds 18% to her roll. So, let's check real quick if Seraph were attacking. Let's say that Seraph were attacking with her unarmed skill versus her unarmored skill. So the opponent has the unarmored, Seraph has the unarmed. So Seraph rolls. Seraph's initial roll, as you can see here, is a 15. Well, unfortunately, Seraph's roll here is a 50 and a 3. Well, that's a 53. Critical hits, unlike attack rolls, you want to roll low. So that 18 means Seraph needs to roll an 18 or lower to successfully critical hit. With a 53, she definitely did not. But a 15 plus a 21, again, is a 36. Let's see what the opponent rolls. In this case, the opponent rolled a 4. Well, 4 plus 23 is a 27, so Seraph definitely hit. Now, if Seraph had actually, say, rolled a 13 here, as you can see, then Seraph would have successfully critically hit, because that's less than an 18. Now, what does a critical hit do? Well, what a critical hit does, unless there's other modifiers involved, which there's some special abilities or edges that change what happens on a critical hit. But normally, when a character critical hits, they double their damage. Well, just so happens Seraph's damage here on her weapon is 4 die 4. So without a critical hit, Seraph will roll a die 4. Let me grab one here. 4 times. Now if she critically hits, she rolls a die 4 8 times. Now there are other things that can modify rolls as well. There's something called a chained roll, for example. And what a chained roll is whenever the GM tells you, well, to do this thing, you need to successfully roll 3 successes in a row. Or maybe the GM will say, to do this thing, you need to roll 3 out of 5 successful rolls. And you have to perform the rolls, either in succession as previously mentioned, or best out of, as also mentioned, until you're successful, unless something breaks. That's what's called a chained roll. Usually it's a number or a series of rolls that you need to make in order to accomplish a more difficult feat. And overall, guess what? That's about it when it comes to how the dice system works. Your skill rolls, which are all of your leading rolls, are always encapsulated by a d20. Critical hit rolls really only apply with combat skills. Now there is an edge that allows you to roll critical hit dice with utility skills, but it's not something everyone has. Everyone has a critical hit value, so you always roll that. Otherwise, you just roll die 20s. The other forms of dice, die 10s, die 8s, die 6s, etc., are most commonly rolled when it comes to damage, and that's pretty much about it. Now, how does damage work? Well, that's pretty simple. We talked up here about these numbers before. Resistance is your ability to shrug off magical damage. Resilience is your ability to shrug off physical damage. Vigor is your ability to shrug off elemental damage. And vulnerabilities is how much additional elemental damage you take. Well, in this particular case, Seraph does 4 die 4 physical damage. There's no note on here that Seraph does any other form of damage. But there is a note that Seraph ignores 5 resilience. That's part of the property of that particular weapon. So whenever Seraph attacks, it's almost like getting 5 bonus damage if your opponent is armored, because you just ignore 5 points of their armor. So what Seraph would do is roll 4 die 4, and that's pretty much it. Now you might also notice that there's really no modifiers at the end of that damage. It's just 4 die 4. Well, that's because in Ether RPG, damage is widely variable. There's not really going to be a lot of numbers that you tag on the end of that ever. It's always going to be a variable set of dice to roll. There are a couple of things that add modifiers at the end, but they're very, very few and very far between. So you shouldn't expect to see them all the time. Sometimes they're there to certain classes, sometimes they're there for certain properties. But for the most part, it's 100% variable with dice rolls. So, that pretty much wraps up the dice system of Ether RPG. As you can see, it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. All you're really going to do is take the final number you have here, and you're going to roll a die 20. The only other numbers you're ever really going to add in are numbers based upon your character sheet, if they're variables, because some of these numbers here might not be reflected here. Again, remember, in our previous video, I did say a normal character sheet on Ether will have a bunch of room back here to write edges, equipment, and whatnot. But I decided to include everything on the front to give everybody a nice one-page view of what a character sheet looks like. So, all you're responsible for as a player is these numbers here, and any modifiers you have on your sheet. Any other modifiers that may come up are the responsibility of the GM. The player is not at all required to be counting or keeping those numbers together in his or her head. So don't worry about it. Ether RPG is designed to, yes, have a bunch of math involved, as you can see, but once you have the final figures down, it's pretty much cut and dry. All you're doing is rolling 1 dice and really adding 1 number. And that's pretty much all there is to it. So, I hope this video has helped. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you want to know a little bit more of anything about the sheet or other information about Ether RPG, feel free to leave any of those questions, comments, or concerns in the comment box, because guess what? This should be the last video that I put forth in preparation for Ether RPG before the Kickstarter. In fact, the Kickstarter should be kicking off sometime within the next couple of weeks. Knock on wood. So, hopefully I will see all of you guys and you will be able to go in and take a look and like what you see and help back me on Kickstarter. So, therefore, thanks for listening, everybody. See you next time.